All right, well, welcome everybody to our November edition of our Fuse Live Fellowship Using the Science of Engagement. Want to welcome you all for spending some time, whether you're watching live today or you're watching the recording. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm the director of the Fellowship Using the Science of Engagement here at UT Austin. And we do these monthly sessions for anybody really that's interested in learning more about our work. We take a shallow dive into one of the practices that are part of our curriculum, share some of the research and the findings, about our program, hopefully answer some questions, give you some background on what the fellowship looks like, the experience your teachers might have if they chose to join, and then answer any questions that you might have. I know some of you are watching live, some of you will watch the recording, so we've got plenty of ways for you to reach out to us as well to connect later on. But I want to introduce a couple folks on our team. You'll be hearing from them later throughout our time together today. Just want to briefly introduce Christian Langford. You can give us a wave. Christian, she's one of our fabulous Fuse facilitators. She and I are going to be talking about one of our practices today called Engaging Brains with Prediction. And then Catherine Yonda, give us a wave, Catherine. Say hi. She's our partnership coordinator. She's going to be monitoring the chat, answering any questions, putting some things in there that Christian and I might talk about, and we'll be there along the way to help you or your districts or anybody that might be interested in joining our program as well. All right, well, I'm going to jump right in then. I'm going to say goodbye to Christian and Catherine here for a few moments, but we'll be welcoming them back. Again, my name is Ryan Smith. I'm the director of the fellowship. Spent the majority of my career with Round Rock Independent School District here just north of Austin, Texas. As a teacher, I was an assistant principal for quite a few years and had multiple roles in the central office in the curriculum instruction, professional development space. Then was the chief of teaching and learning for a couple of years before joining UT Austin, and have had the pleasure of helping to build out this fellowship that started in Texas and continues to flourish within our state, but has also now expanded beyond the borders of Texas and even the borders of the United States. We have teachers in our program right now from across the country as well as Europe as well. And I know some of you joining today might be from some of those non-Texas places, so we welcome you and thank you for spending some time with us. Always like to start our time together with just kind of the Fuse backstory, where we come from. Our lead scientific director and really the done all the work and the research and the development of the practices that your teachers learn throughout our program. He works directly with your teachers as well throughout their experiences. Dr. David Yeager. He is a professor here of psychology here at the University of Texas at Austin. And his career has all revolved around adolescent motivation, adolescent mindset development, how we can create better cultures of learning, not only for the children in our lives, but the adolescents that many of us teach in our classrooms, and how we can help support teachers in navigating that adolescent time frame when we are asking a lot of our young people, we're asking them to learn very challenging things, to have very high levels of rigor. And it's a time in life where, they're trying to figure out who they are and their place and how they contribute. And how can we create those perceptions and that feeling in them that we believe just as much in them as they believe in themselves at that point, and how they can believe that that perception of support matches these high standards that we have for them. He's also the author of 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. That book came out about a year ago, and since then he's been spreading that work not only to all the teachers in our fellowship, but also to teachers and principals and assistant principals, superintendents around the world, as this message, this idea of building how we can build stronger cultures of learning in our classrooms has continued to grow. But we don't work, just with ourselves. Another key member of our team, and specifically on our development and our path, has been Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford. Dr. Yeager was one of her lead grad students when he was getting his doctorate at Stanford, and led many of the growth mindset studies, national studies of learning mindset, all that work and those decades of research and development around mindset development. And Dr. Dweck and Dr. Yeager have partnered now to develop Fuse and bring it to teachers around the globe. But then also Dr. Uri Treisman, who was really a legendary calculus teacher here at UT Austin. So David and Carol, they knew that they had the research, they had the data, they had the practices that they knew would work, and we needed to partner with folks who are delivering these ideas to young people, and actually, in classrooms, working with them. And that's where Dr. Treisman and his team came in at the Dana Center. I'm here at UT Austin as well. He and his team are very well known for being able to take students from across Texas who are automatically gain enrollment into UT Austin, because we have a process here where if you're in the top 5% in your graduating class of whatever high school you're in the state, you get a seat at UT. And it's a very diverse state in terms of rural districts, urban districts, suburban districts, students coming from very different backgrounds, very different levels of experience when it comes to subjects like calculus. And he has been able to create cultures in his classroom where the level of rigor stays incredibly high. His students move on to become, professional mathematicians, math professors, working in the AI industry at this point and other places, and also combining a feeling for those students who maybe didn't have the same level of calculus and level of rigor in some of their high school experiences that others did, and create a space where all types of students can be successful. So do some research on him. He's a legendary figure in the learning space. And then we also wanted, to hear directly from teachers and how these practices would work and look in their classrooms. So we partner with our On-Ramps program here at UT as well. On-Ramps, if you're not familiar, is a dual credit enrollment program. All the teachers in On-Ramps get versions of Fuse and the Fuse practices throughout their experience as well. But we brought in some of the real high flyers in their programs. They've got over 1,700 teachers around the state, all teaching dual credit programs, dual enrollment programs. And we really wanted to find who are some of those teachers on campuses who are outperforming, their students are outperforming their peers when it comes to AP exam results here in Texas, STAR EOC type results. And how are they talking to their students? How are they framing struggle, stress, motivation in ways that are allowing their students to be more successful and feel that the support they're receiving from their teachers matches that level of rigor. So we brought them all here to UT and spent a week with them, just getting down into the weeds of, okay, how do you talk about tests? How do you talk about stress in your classroom? How do you talk about your view of mistakes? How do you, when you spiral content, for your students, how are you explaining it to them in a way that they don't think that you, as the teacher, are assuming they just weren't paying attention last time? And that they know that you believe that the best way to recall information and bring that memory back is to spiral content. So throughout Fuse, we're not a math curriculum, we're not a certain content area curriculum, but we come from a behavioral science, motivational science, and cognitive science lens to help teachers structure their language in ways around certain key practices in the classroom that do lead to better performance of students and a higher sense of well-being on the teacher part. So I don't have a slide here today on our data, but if you go to our website, which Catherine will put in the various chats that folks are watching today, you can see some of our data, from the last several years in Fuse. We're incredibly proud that not only are the students outperforming their peers on their exams, performance tasks, but also teachers in Fuse classrooms are reporting a much greater sense of well-being, less of a desire to leave the profession, and a desire to actually even stay in the current position that they're in to continue to work with their students. So we believe that's because by creating stronger engagement from students to teachers, then that's the key that unlocks a lot of the sense of well-being and everything that we want our teachers to have. So that's kind of our origin story. We've been around 4 or 5 years at this point, worked with hundreds of teachers, like I said, across our program, across our fellowship. And my goal for today really is to give a little bit of background on the research, but then also take a dive into one of the practices that they learn, and then talk about the structure of the fellowship in case you have questions about how your teachers might be able to join us for the 26-27 school year. So the adolescent predicament, is really what we start off with, with the teachers, is we give them a deep dive into hormonal development and the science of adolescent development and what's really happening, in a young person's body between the ages of 10 and 25, and how it's happening at different points, for everybody. You've got students in your classrooms today, if you're maybe say you're a 6th, 7th grade teacher, that are almost all the way through puberty. You've got some students who are just starting puberty. The only thing that's for sure for everybody is today, that's the day they've had more testosterone in their bodies than they've ever had in their entire lives. And then tomorrow, that'll be the day they've got the most testosterone they've ever had. So that's the only constant. But that predicament that we talk about is that oftentimes we, shy away from some of the opportunities that come from puberty and come from that innate desire that young people have to seek status and seek respect. Because during that part of our development, middle school, high school, that's where, our bodies are biologically tuned to start proving like who we are, what value we provide, what our place is, within our tribe, within our classroom, within our family, within our culture. Once you're, 12 or 13-year-old, like you're expected to be a contributor and like have a role that's more so than just somebody who's always being taken care of, that maybe in elementary school or early on, you were just more of a receiver, but we are tuned to also be a provider. And we believe, and through our research and through our practices, that we can help teachers tap into that need for our students who we know they're always seeking for that status and respect. So they're driven by that. And that predicament, though, is while they're seeking status and respect during that part of their development, it's also a time when they're never so afraid to be being embarrassed or being called out in a negative way or being seen as less than or being seen as immature. You want to, quickly disengage with a teenager, create that impression that you as a authority figure, a parent, teacher, anything, feel like they're immature. That's a key way to get them to disengage with you. So we spend a lot of time talking about how can we recognize that both these things are happening at the same time, that drive for respect and status, and that drive to not feel embarrassed or diminished or called out, to craft our language around key points in a classroom to make sure that we are elevating that need for status and respect and feeding into it and lowering that potential for miscommunication, for misinterpretation that leads to that feeling of embarrassment or feeling that you're less than. So Fuse is all about, how we communicate to young people and how we structure and frame our language to tap into those opportunities. So 100 years of adolescent development is basically just what I shared, but just knowing that, as teenagers, their brains and hormones make them hypersensitive about status, how they look to others and how they feel about themselves. If you're a teacher in a classroom or you have kids of your own or you spend any time in schools or with teenagers, you know this, you see it all the time. And we also know that sensitivity, to how they look to others, how they feel about themselves, enhances fear of failure in a classroom. So if I don't feel like it's a safe place to ask for help and raise my hand, or I worry that, I may be shown in a negative light if I do that, there's no way I'm going to ask for help or raise my hand or do anything like that. But if it's not necessarily all bad, because if that is, we're primed to learn during our teenage years and develop who we are, so we can take advantage of that. So it's not all bad. That hypersensitivity is what helps us transition into adulthood successfully. And we believe, and we see it with our teachers every day, is with this understanding, it's possible to harness that sensitivity and use it to promote deeper engagement and learning. And we do that around structuring language around key points, how we talk about mistakes, how we talk about tests, how we talk about stress, how we talk about struggle, and how we talk about kind of why we're doing what we're doing. Why, like I said, why we're spiraling content, why we're spacing our practice out in certain ways, things like that. We're going to talk later today about why using predictive language, is so key in tapping into that brain piece where you can recall that information, and how we're tuned for that. A few more things just about kind of the background on the research in our program. Knowing that it is that spike in testosterone in adolescence, regardless of gender, of course, that drives adolescence hypersensitivity to signs of status and respect. The signs of respect from a teacher help adolescents feel that they are on track towards becoming adults, and how they feel that respect is highly rewarding to them. So we mainly work with math teachers in our program. And so we talk about, when somebody makes a mistake, how can you use that as an opportunity to lean into and show them, remind them that you do respect them, that mistake they made contributes to the learning of others, as opposed to oftentimes inadvertently, saying things that make them feel diminished or make them feel that making that mistake was not a value add, to the learning of themselves and others. So really thinking about our language around those key points. And that hypersensitivity is also it's a tricky thing, right? Because if you veer off as the adult, if you veer off that path, you can quickly disengage with a teenager. And to us, because we have more life experience, we can let things slide off our back a little easier. But as a young person, you don't have decades of experiences to know that, oh, maybe that teacher didn't really mean it that way, or just because I'm feeling this way, maybe that wasn't their intention. But we know that with teenagers, even completely innocuous interactions that most adults wouldn't think twice about can be interpreted as signs that we don't respect them or take them seriously. Having a conversation with a teacher in one of our coaching sessions recently, and she said that she's just seeing such a difference in her students because she stopped saying a few things that she recognized they were misinterpreting. For instance, she really is working on not saying things like, you learned this last year, or don't you remember when we did this last week? Innocuous to her, not meaning any disrespect to it, but when talking to her students, that self-talk that they heard when they heard her say that was, well, my teacher thinks I wasn't paying attention before, or she thinks I didn't, learn anything last year. So just by clarifying that and being more transparent, we can avoid a lot of these pitfalls that lead to disengagement in the classroom. And of course, like I've been saying, that hypersensitivity, leads to opportunities. So finding those moments. We talk a lot about small moments in a classroom where you can take advantage of that. And a student making a mistake and having the guts to raise their hand is one of those moments. Or when they take a chance, and get it halfway right. Reminding them that you might have gotten this problem wrong, but it took so much courage to ask for help. And let's look at it here. You were 90% right, and flipping that switch of helping them see that they were 90% right versus 100% wrong is a great way to keep that engagement there. And then finally, students in math courses start to suspect if our students, even for a smidge, start to suspect that their teacher doesn't, respect them or see that they have that potential to learn and improve. They oftentimes conclude that the teacher doesn't see them as a worthwhile investment and time to teach. And we know this because we've interviewed and talked with thousands, tens of thousands at this point of students, 6th through 9th grade mainly across the country. And we ask them, when you hear this from your teacher, what are you thinking? And some of those conversations that as a teacher you don't get to have, all the time in the moment, but we've done that research and are working to create these practices to help combat that. And just a teacher testimonial, and we'll share these slides, with everybody. We'll put a post out after today, so you can get this. But really, framing challenge as a desirable part of the learning process rather than something to be avoided. That's something we often do. Thinking about how do we talk about mistakes? That's a big one. I talk about that all the time. What are we choosing to praise? In the classroom, are we only praising success? Are we praising work? Praising somebody taking the chance and showing the guts to ask for help. So such key points, where we can really frame that challenge, as something that should be rewarded and something that should be praised. One thing we know always, and Dr. Yeager always talks with our teachers about this, is we know that grown-splaining, over intellectualizing, why we want them to do something does not work. It doesn't work with adults, doesn't work with kids. So we talk a lot about not being, always, helping with giving an answer too quickly, or trying to, like I said, intellectualize it or explain something away, but instead finding, ways to praise them that are behaviors that they've done that are courageous, like I said, like asking for help, like coming in for tutoring, things like that take a lot of guts. And really the crux, of what we do is really helping, teachers, stop fearing that adolescent development piece and realizing that we can harness it and use it to our advantage, to create more engaging classroom environments. And how do we do that? So we do that with our fellowship model. It's called Fuse. Like I said, we're in our I think next year will be our 5th year here in this current version. We've done different versions of Fuse over the last decade or so. But it's a fellowship model where teachers join for either 1 or 2 years. Most of them do both years, so they can do all 10 practices, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But rather than a like one-off conference or workshop, that we might come in and do, or you might send your teachers to, what we are is we're very much a ongoing kind of slow drip of engagement with the teachers that happen throughout the school year. So they start off, with a conference in the summer, but then throughout the year, we continue to come back to that knowledge through coaching meetings, through updates and thought, processes that we put into Canvas throughout the year, constantly asking them to come back to that learning. When I was with Round Rock, one of the frustrations when I was in charge of professional development was we would do so much work, in the summer, with teachers on new initiatives, new plans, new ideas. There's always this gap between when they learn stuff in the summer and then when the school year actually starts, and then the school year starts and things start spiraling, and next thing you know, it's the next summer again. So our approach is very much more methodical, and kind of like I said, like a low key, constant opportunity to engage with each other, the other teachers in the fellowship, our team, and the students in their classrooms. Some of the ways that looks is we structure our practices that teachers learn into kind of two buckets. One is all about their culture of learning in their classroom, how they are communicating their beliefs and values, how they are structuring that language, using a lot of our background and our experience with behavioral science, with motivational science. How are you structuring how you communicate your retesting and revision policy that will make it much more likely that students will engage with it? How are you better understanding, maybe why one of your students or some of your students are not willing to try a retest or come in for help? How you're talking about your grading policy, how you're talking about all these things, and making sure that they are aligned with how you're also communicating your values. So that's all the culture of learning piece. We spend a lot of time talking about how do you structure your language about a reteach, not the process of like how to teach a certain standard, but instead, how are you engaging with that young person to make it more likely that they will see you as somebody that respects them? And you might have always respected them, but as we know, teenagers are sometimes hard to get through to, if you haven't heard that. So we've done a lot of research on the best way to frame our language to help them better understand our true intent, which is to help them and create a good culture. And then the other bucket, of our practices is really all around cognitive science, science of learning in the engaged brain. So all these practices that great teachers are doing already in classrooms, like retrieval practices, using predictive language like we're going to talk about, space practice, and how are we communicating that again to their students, and how are we letting the students know why we do this? So this is actually how the science works in your brain. You want to be able to recall information, sometimes weeks later from when you first learned it. So these are different strategies, different ways that they learn to make it more likely that they will be successful on that test that maybe happens, a couple weeks after they were actually taught it the first time, or they learned it the first time. So we always look at ways that we don't want our students making the same mistakes in February that they were making in October. And these are practices that help lead to that. So those are kind of our two buckets. Here's the actual practices that teachers learn throughout the fellowship. Reframe mistakes, exam speeches. Also on our website, there's snippets of each of these. They learn 3 in the summer, 2 in the fall, and then in the spring we talk a lot about implementation and thinking through how can you test some of these out in your classes. Again, these are not a math curriculum, they're not a science curriculum. It's more when you're implementing your curriculum, how are you framing your language that'll make it more likely your students will be engaged with your curriculum. So you can go on if you like and look for those. Last month, we spent a lot of time talking about the mining for mistakes, collaborative troubleshooting routine. So if you're on our Substack or you go there, you can see last month's video. We go into depth on that one. Next month, we're going to talk about exam speeches and how structuring our language, when we first announce a test is coming up, how important that is. How we talk to our students the day of that test is critical. And then how do we talk to our students when they get those grades back? Especially if some of them might be disappointed or surprised about how they did, or even if they did great. How are you framing that language to make sure that they know that that you see learning as a process, the test is not an endpoint, and that the hard work they've put in is what's contributed to this score that they have, and now there's opportunity to continue to learn. So critical, that piece right there. So, like I said, today we're going to jump into one of these. Christian and I are going to chat about one called Engaging Brains with Prediction. I'm going to bring Christian back up here to the podium. And I don't know, Christian, do you want to say hello again, give a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump in here.
Sure. Hi, I'm Christian Langford. I've been with Fuse for, I don't know, this going on year 3, 4, something. It's been a while, but it's been fabulous to be a part of this. I'm going to call it a movement. But I have been in the classroom for 14 years. I taught high school, Algebra 1 through Algebra 2, and I'm just very encouraged and excited to be able to share all the science around engagement with the fellows we currently have and the ones that we are soon to get.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Christian's one of our team that spends a lot of time in the coaching meetings, working directly with our teachers, and always hear great feedback about not only her expertise, but also the relationships that she's able to build. Even though most of it is virtual, we spend a lot of time with our teachers as well. But we're going to spend just a few slides talking about this one particular practice. So again, before we jump into that, just to remind everybody, so your teachers, over the 2-year period, they learn 10 different practices. So this is just one of them. And the way we present them is always as, we know that you're, as if I'm talking to one of the teachers, we know that you're the expert in your classroom. Like, your students best, your scope and sequence, your unit plan, whatever curriculum you happen to be using. What we know is these are some tried and true research practices that we know are create a better, increased student engagement. So you find the best place to use them, best time to use them, best sequence to use them in. And even if there's one that you think doesn't really work with your kids at all, then you don't need to use it. So, or let us know how we can adjust it to better work with your students. So one of them that our group Learning the Engaged Brain practices does talk about is engaging brains with prediction. And it's really a mindset shift in how we talk to students about what they're about to learn, how we tune into what we all have is that ability to become more engaged when we're thinking of something that we need to predict, that's coming up. So just kind of how the brain learns and remembers. Some of this might be review for others, but it's a prediction machine. We're constantly making predictions, about what we think is going to happen, and it's a great way to engage somebody right off the bat. Christian, do you have some general initial thoughts on this practice? I know you were just actually working with some of our teachers on this practice recently.
Yes, and so I think what's very crucial with this is kind of going back to what you were talking about earlier about how students forget so much over the summer. And I think this strategy is very, very, it's a good one to use because it does get students to pull back from what they already have discovered, what they've already learned, and then use it to predict about what is to come. But I really feel like teachers need to kind of explain to students the background behind it and what's actually happening in the brain and how it's so important to make these predictions in order to retain information. But I just know that talking with some of the teachers yesterday, a lot of them realized that, yes, we have been doing this in our classrooms, but they realized that incorporating things as you'll see in some slides to come, the key word of the hypothesis and them that triggers something for some of these students, understanding that, we do this in science all the time, but getting students just to understand that it's the same thing, but we want you to incorporate that the same way we do in science into our math classrooms.
Yeah, and so much of this practice in particular, is really helping. We help teachers understand the science of why using predictive language, creates more engagement, not just with young people, but with everybody. And it's almost just really thinking through almost how you can say the same thing that you want to say, but without telling. So we talk a lot about, overcoming that compulsion to tell, that as adults we often have. We like to, sometimes like to tell people what we know, but instead shifting just the way we present it, to an open-ended question with some uptake, and how that can lead to a better place.
And then another key point to like how the whole thing works, like we have a scenario right now on the screen, but it's just getting students to understand that in your everyday life, your brain is constantly taking in information and updating itself. So like, for example, on the screen right now, like you have an event planned and say you want to cancel it, but you have a group of people you're going with and you're constantly processing like, okay, well, the last time I did this upset this person? Or how do I need to handle this? Or what should I say based off of your past experiences? And so with all of that, students can do the same thing in the classroom with the concept by finding those patterns and things that they can link together to see what's going to happen. And a key point, that last part on our slide right here about predictions being wrong. It's kind of nice for students to have an understanding of predictions that are correct and incorrect, just like in science with the hypothesis. But letting them know that, you know, what did you just get from having an incorrect or a wrong? I hate saying wrong, incorrect, but I mean, that's the fact behind it, that we are going to continue with the lesson and we're actually figure out what the correct answer is. But the students can understand that I just thought through this and this is what I came to. And now that is now stored in my brain so that I don't make that same mistake again. But you just have to make it comfortable and clear in the classroom for students to understand, you know, like maybe it's a pencils down event. You pose a question and you ask students something about, you know, what do you think is going to happen if I change this number? But let's not write it on paper. Let's have a conversation about it and let's see where it kind of goes. And I think with the teachers yesterday, we all came to the agreement that with prediction, you should kind of let it be fluid, because if you have multiple students making predictions in your classroom, you know, you can kind of jump on that as another learning experience, because now students can agree or disagree or bring someone over to their side and, you know, like I saw it this way and I saw it this way. And then as a teacher, it's like, okay, well, let's go with that and see what actually happens. But you can have a lot of fun with prediction in the classroom for sure.
Yeah, definitely. How about anything in particular? And because I know most of our teachers are math teachers, and you were a math teacher, Christian. So just maybe some specifics in the math realm.
In the math realm, I would do things like if you're talking about linear functions, or I think yesterday it came up where we had tables, and so we had tables of data, and depending on like what topic you're in, it can be anything from, you know, let's look at this data here. We're not going to graph it yet, but let's see if the patterns are leading us to, are these lines going to intersect? Are they going to be parallel? It can be something along the lines of getting students to understand, you know, growth and decay just by looking at the graph. So we're not going to actually do the thing yet, but we want to just think about what we've learned at this point from seeing tables years ago and seeing how these numbers are increasing and decreasing. And let's have a conversation. And also we want to talk about the why. So it's not just like a yes, no, or it's increasing, decreasing, but go further and have students verbally explain this amongst their peers, so then they can all find the same patterns if there was somebody in the class that didn't quite see it the first time. But it's just a way for us to all come together and like we're pulling from prior knowledge, and that's the only way we're going to get these students to retain things. We can't just start with the new lesson, but we have to kind of allow them the ability to dig in there and let's pull the knowledge out that we want them to retain, that was from the actual beginning of the unit, the beginning of the year.
Yeah, thank you. And I was just looking through some of the discussion threads in Canvas. So teachers in our program too, they attend, you know, live virtual or in-person events with us. And then they also have a lot of back and forth within our Canvas platform. And I see some of them, you know, saying that, you know, I feel like I thought I was using predictive language, you know, and I understand, you know, the power of it. But then I invited a colleague who's also a fellow, you know, to come in and kind of track how many times I said predictive type statements. It was an eye opener, you know, that until you really kind of have another view, you know, on the language that you're using, how you're framing your language in class, that you don't always get that. So that's a piece of Fuse I think is important too, is that some of the practices, you know, that we learn and implement, is what Fuse does really provides a extended time and space to practice something. So it's might be something that is already sort of included, in somebody's pedagogy. But this is a way to take a strategy or an element of that delivery, and really spend an extended period of time to go deep in it, and find the best place to use it, and really understand if you're saying the things that you think that you're saying. We always like to share a testimonial, from one of our teachers, as well. And just the highlighted part here, notice that I guess I have questions to feel more like a game, like a problem without all the information. Students feel like they're looking for clues. Games are great. Games work with adults, with teenagers especially, and then always finding ways to get them in that zone, And I love what Christian said. It doesn't have to be so formal all the time. A lot of times it's put the paper away, and we're just going to have a conversation, but structuring our conversation in a way that forces them to recall, maybe not look at their notes, to come up with predictions on their own. Because even if you predict it incorrectly or correctly, it's gonna leave a mark, so to say. So the last piece, just on that practice, we've got some just some applications. I think Christian, already talked about, some of these, but here's some ways to think of embedding some of these questions into your practice. Again, the key thing to see here is these are all open-ended type questions, with uptake. And we talk a lot about questions with uptake and how they lead to a why question after that. And again, the process is more important here than the outcome, of did they predict correctly or not.
Yeah. And then on the last slide that we have, it's like some tips. I think just from listening to teachers yesterday, and then from my experience is it can be structured, but just allow it to be very flexible and allow yourself the ability to make adjustments. And, a lot of times, so many of our teachers, they get burned out because as a teacher, you're doing so much, but allow the students to help you guide this when it comes to making these predictions in your content. You can pose a question. You can just put up an equation and then ask questions about it. What do you think is going to happen? But understand that so much can come from making that one change in the equation. Like maybe this equation, it was in standard form, but the first coefficient, you turned it from positive to negative. And we just talk about, what is that going to do to this problem? And all you did was to put that one little sign change on the problem. And then you just created a whole nother problem for students to talk about. And then from there, work out. So it doesn't have to be so like, oh, I forgot to write these questions down, but it's kind of like go with the flow and you realize, what's the next slide, what's coming up in your lesson. So think about it's like the transition of, before I tell them, let's see what they know. And then also it's going to help you understand if you need to make some tweaks and like the prior learning that they had, because they're all predicting the wrong thing. You can also use that now to be like, okay, wait a minute, we're making predictions, but they're catching me off guard because now everyone's getting the wrong prediction. So maybe I need to slow down a little bit and let's talk about this so I can get them on track again. But yeah, this is just another tool, another strategy. And like Ryan was saying, a lot of us use this, but it's just another way of figuring out, how much do we use this? When do we use it? Is it relevant? And how can we make sure that it benefits our students in our classroom?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad Christian brought up the coaching sessions that you did yesterday too, because it gives a good example of kind of our process within Fuse. So teachers learn this practice. They learn the science behind, why predictive language helps recall in the brain, why it leads to better engagement. So they learned all that, in the summer actually. And then they had the last couple months to test it out, to try to be intentional about incorporating that into their instructional delivery. And then they come back to a coaching session, which are only about an hour long, and they get to talk with their peers about how the changes they might have noticed. They get to talk to Christian about, things she's heard from past fellows and she's done in her classroom. So it's just a good example of how we really try to structure Fuse so it's beyond just like a one-time learning event and a true fellowship, that continues.
And can I add one more thing?
Go right ahead.
For the sake of time. With the coaching sessions, what happened yesterday, it was fabulous. We had a conversation and we ended up coming up with a whole activity from the teachers that were there that developed just from the coaching session that now they're going to take and they're going to try. And so another part of being a predictive this practice right now is you can have your students go ahead and write questions that they might feel should be on the test review. And so we said, we can have students that are working in groups, and each group can come up with, one question per topic that's going to be tested or quizzed just to make sure that you have everything covered. And then from there, we said, okay, well, what if from there they wrote down the work and the answers to it, they kept it to the side, maybe had it on a dry erase board, and then rotate the groups. And then that could become the test review day. But it was just interesting how the one concept just developed into something else, which giving teachers that time to actually sit and talk through that, they're now going to go and take it and try it. So it was just a fabulous moment just to see the teachers actually like the gears were going. And it's like, well, what if we did this? Oh, we do it this way. And then it just completely morphed into an activity that they're going to try next week. So I just wanted to share that piece because it was fabulous.
No, that's great to hear. I'm jealous, and I'm sorry I missed that session last night, but it sounds like it was a great conversation. I think it's a good example too of how using a fellowship model again is impactful, because I know we have a lot of teachers in our program right now that come from, if you're not from Texas, you don't know how rural some of the parts are, of the state. And there might be one or two secondary math teachers in an entire school district in some places. And I know some of our more rural districts have used Fuse to try to help those teachers kind of build their network of support, beyond their own district. So being able to get in a room, with math teachers who are teaching the same thing you are, but from all across the country, really leads to some great ideas and activities and things they can turn around and start right off the bat. All right, well, I'm going to thank Christian for joining us today. I'm going to we'll say goodbye to Christian. We'll move her off the screen here, but she's wonderful, and we'll be back with us next month if you want to join us again to learn about exam speeches. But I'm going to spend just the next maybe 10 minutes or so. I want to go over just some of the logistics around the program itself. So right now is the perfect time, to be having these conversations, because our cohorts launch, some teachers start in the spring, but most of them start in the summer. So we've got some time now to talk about what's the kind of best way to talk with teachers in your district or principals or anybody that might be interested in learning more about potentially joining Fuse next year. We start in June each year for most teachers, with our summer professional learning institute. It's going to be June 17th through 19th this coming year. I'm still working on that location, but it'll be somewhere in Texas, probably around one of the urban areas, so people can get there pretty easily. But they'll start off. They'll meet all the other teachers in their fellowship. We expect a couple hundred new teachers joining, so they can. They'll meet and hear from Dr. Yeager. We have panels. Dr. Dweck often comes and meets with the teachers as well. So that'll be June 17th through 19th. They do their first few practices. It's a great high energy kind of kickoff to their experience with the fellowship. Christian and all the facilitators will be there, everything like that. So that's our only real in-person portion of the program. And again, if you have teachers that can't make it those days, we also do virtual makeup sessions throughout the summer as well, so they can start also. And then they do a full day fall institute. Those happen in October. So that's where they learn the 4th and 5th practice of their first year, depending on which group they're in. So that would be a day out of the classroom where they meet with us. We use a real engaging online platform called Engagely for them to work together, do group activities, let us know how things are going, things that we could tweak on our delivery, how they can, turn back on what they're learning around with their students. And there's another one of those in the spring. So the big kind of time commitment on the teacher's part is that 2.5 days in the summer. Could be those days, could be spread out if they can't make it there live, and then 2 days during the school year. So those are kind of the main crux of where they interact with each other and the delivery. But then they also have, this great picture from our event last year. There's Christian, you met her. There's Amalia, one of our facilitators, and Charles, and Sergio. Those are our facilitators also. And then there's the coaching piece. So That's what Christian was mentioning also. These are virtual. They happen 4 times a year. They're about an hour long. And they happen, we give multiple options to either come early in the morning or after school, where they get to hear from their peers, get some feedback on their implementation of trying out one of the practices, things like that. Real key part of our program to kind of keep that engagement happening throughout the year. So that's a critical portion, but it does not require like substitute coverage or anything like that. And then the third kind of tier, I always talk about Fuse as kind of like a 3-legged stool. So you've got the fellowship where your teachers are building their networks, meeting with other teachers from around the country, mainly from Texas, but all over the place as well. So that's like one tier. And then the second, or one leg of the stool, the second leg of the stool is the teacher practices that they learn. It's those 10 different elements that I talked about earlier. And then the third leg are the student engagement modules. So the students in each of their classes also complete 3 modules throughout the year. They take about 1 class period, and it's an opportunity for them also to learn about their own sense of academic belonging, like their own purpose, their own mindset development, their own how memory recall works in their brain, different ways for them to better understand things like stress. Better understanding that stress doesn't have to be debilitating. It could be something that we take advantage of. Especially in the spring, we spend a lot of time talking about those butterflies you feel in your stomach as you're heading into an exam or a performance. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That doesn't mean that that's something you need to make go away. That is your body getting ready to do something challenging, doing something exciting. So the students do a module in January where they learn that stress can be enhancing, that they can grow from it, that they're feeling that way because they're about to do something that's important to them. And they've worked hard, and they are excited about what they're about to get to do. And then we work with the teachers to make sure that they're reinforcing kind of that reframe of stress that the students just learned about. So kind of moving them away from saying things like, just take a deep breath, or you don't need to feel that way, or anything that as adults we say all the time, but can really discount a young person's true feeling. And how much more powerful could that be if we help them lean into that feeling that they're having and remind them that they can reframe that away from being something negative or something they need to fear to something they can see as a challenge and something that they can see as an opportunity to perform. So they learn a lot about their own brain development and their own reaction to kind of who they are in the world. But then embedded within those student modules, we also ask them some questions about their perception on the culture in their class. We ask them questions like, students in my class feel comfortable making a mistake, or my teachers believe all students can be successful in math. Or we ask them, my class feels rushed. So we talk a lot about, what happens when, as a teacher, we say things like, we've got so much to cover, or we've got to get through this, and how that can decrease engagement, because you're much less likely to have a student raise their hand if they think that, oh, we got so much to do today, I'm going to get my teacher off track. Or if I raise my hand and ask for help, it's going to be seen as some kind of character flaw on my part, because my teacher might think that I wasn't paying attention. But instead, we work with the teachers to be very transparent with their language around how much they respect and hope, that students do raise their hand, and why that is a value add to the class as opposed to a deficit. And then the teachers get reports back 3 times a year also. So they get a glimpse into the students' perception of their class as well. And that link that Catherine put in the chat earlier about the Fuse library practices, if you scroll down a little further on that same link, you'll see some sample reports that the teachers get. I think on our Substack also, I just put a kind of an overview of what those reports look like. So that'd be a good resource to take a look at as well. So 3 student engagement modules throughout the year. And then again, the purpose of those is really to help, shift that adolescent perception of the classroom. So whether it's the teacher modules or the student modules, our real goal is to change that perception away from a culture of compliance towards a culture of learning. So even if a teacher never says, go try harder alone when somebody, doesn't do well on a test or needs a reteach, if the perception, is there that me as the student feels that I'm not being supported, then I'm going to feel like I'm in that culture of compliance or a disrespectful culture. Whether the teacher intends that or not, if that perception is there, it's the reality. So we try everything we do, we try to move that perception of our students to that culture of learning. And we do that through, really working with the adults in the room on framing their language in ways that are seen and perceived as being more respectful. And again, tapping into that need for status and respect that we know our students naturally have. So again, I'll share these slides. A lot of people like this one to kind of share with others, but I want to just put a caveat there that that culture of compliance column there, we're not saying that anybody ever actually says these things verbatim, but it's a perception that's often built in teenagers. We know that because we ask the teenagers, we survey thousands of them, that we need to change the way that they see the level of support they're receiving in the class. And the way that we do that is by working with ourselves and the adults to make sure we're framing our language in a way that enforces that culture of learning. All right, just a couple more things before we wrap up. So some nuts and bolts, brass tacks on the fellowship itself. So there is a cost involved, but I've got a great announcement for our Texas partners. So we recently were awarded a National Science Foundation grant. And for the 26-27 school year, we're actually able to lower the price for 6th through 9th grade math teachers in Texas down to $1,000. So for others, we still want you to join. We still love to have you. That price will stay at $2,350 per teacher. But again, for 6th through 9th grade math teachers in Texas, we're able to lower that down to only $1,000 a year. And the best part about that is our Fuse honorarium. So every teacher in the fellowship, and again, you can have instructional coaches, principals, anybody else joins. So anybody that joins the fellowship will receive the $1,000 honorarium paid back to them through the first year, through University of Texas at Austin. And again, just to clarify that $1,000 for teachers next year it's first year Fuse fellows. So again, that's wish we could do that $1,000 for everybody, but the $1,000 grant supported option that we have for next year is going to be for first year fellows, 6th through 9th grade math in the state of Texas. But would still love to. We have teachers from all over, and would love to continue to work with everybody. But that $1,000 honorarium goes to every Fuse fellow once they complete their year. Another new thing we started this year is our executive leadership series. So every central office leader, assistant principal in any of our Fuse districts get invited to 4 leadership series sessions throughout the year. These are a great way for us to stay connected, with you and how to better support your Fuse teachers, things to look for in their classrooms, questions to ask them when you're doing walkthroughs, things you should notice, maybe changes in ways they're talking to students. Things like that. And they also feature special guests at each one. So in the email I send you with this, I'll send you links to our first 2. We've done one in August and one in just yesterday, actually. I'll send you links to those. Those are with Dr. Yeager. And then yesterday was with Steph Okamoto from ServiceNow and Dr. Christopher Bryan here from UT as well. So everybody gets invited to those, and they're a great kind of additional value, that we add to our district partners. But we also invite anybody that wants to attend those can at least be there for the special guest portion. And our next one coming up is actually going to be on February 18th. And Kevin Carroll, he's a motivational ally here at UT Austin, does a lot of work with the Longhorn football team. Even if you're not a Longhorn fan, he works with others as well. But he's a great guy that is super excited to kind of share his message with folks in the education world. And he'll be joining us again February 18th. If you want to join that and would love to have you there, you can go to our website. There's a place there for you to sign up, just so we get your email, so we can make sure that we add you to that invite. Just a couple things actually one last thing before we sign off for today. So our ask, is that if anything that Christian or I talked with you about today is of interest, resonates with you at all, aligns with anything that you're hoping to accomplish, with your district, campus, or teachers next school year, we would love to talk more about it. We want to learn, how we can, cater our program again to meet some of your goals and some of the things that you're hoping to accomplish, with your teams. So I would love to have a quick chat, learn more about you, learn more about how we might be able to support your teachers, whether it's with the full fellowship or whether it's with just individual nuggets or pieces, or you just want to talk about adolescent motivation and get some ideas on how you can support the teachers and young people in your systems, we'd love to have that chat. I believe that QR code right there goes to my meeting link. So you can sign up for just a quick session. We can visit. You can always email us as well. You can respond to this when we get it. You can chat with us on LinkedIn, on Substack, on any of those places. And we've got a lot of options for you to connect. But I think that's what we have for today. Just want to thank you again for joining us. This is our team here at UT. And just want to always end with this quote from Dr. Yeager. Fuse really was designed so teachers have a library of resources, a network of colleagues, and a dedicated time. That time piece is huge for us to think carefully about how they would like to use this important science. So we share the science, we share the ideas, we share the practices, but I truly believe that you and your teachers know your context, your students best, and we're here just to support and help you accomplish your goals. So thank you so much, everybody, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. Hope to hear from you as soon as possible so we can talk about partnering in the 26-27 school year. Thank you very much, everybody.